In this video, we're going to look at working with key switch instruments. Now, we use the play page here to browse and load instruments, patterns, and multis into what are called parts. We have 16 parts, so each one can contain an instrument and or a pattern. Now, these collection of 16 parts with their instruments and the effects that we set up in the patterns are called multis. And on the right side here, this whole thing is called the part viewer. So multis can contain two types of instruments. They're standard single articulation instruments, like when we drill into here, let's say I go into ensemble violins, we'll see things like violins détaché with different lengths of time, violins sustain, etc. And the other type of instrument, which contain multiple articulations, are key switch instruments, and they have KS next to it, indicating that we use trigger notes outside the playable range of the instrument to switch articulations. And with part 1 selected now, I'm going to double click that and load it in. Now, there are different kinds of multi-articulation instruments in Miroslav Philharmonic 2. The most common to work with are key switch ones, and that's what we're looking at now. But we also have velocity switching instruments that have VS next to it. And that means the harder you strike the key, that'll determine which articulations are triggered. And we also, in some rare instances in Philharmonic, have mod wheel switching, which have an MW next to it for mod wheel, indicating that the position of the control 1 message or the mod wheel value that's being sent is going to determine what articulation is being used. So for now, we have a key switch instrument loaded in, the violin ensemble, and we see these blackened notes down here, and when we click on them, it'll bring up a palette showing us a legend of the key switch notes that are available. So for example, sustain is the default, but we can use détaché, staccato, espressivo, staccato with a sforzando at the beginning, nice attack, tremolo, etc. Now each instrument family has their own set of articulations. Now, in this case, I'm going to leave this loaded in, and I'm going to play in a part. Let me leave it on sustain A for now. If you're using a keyboard controller with a wide range of 7 octaves or more, you can use your left hand to play in the key switch notes at the same time that you play the melody with your right hand. Now, you've got to be a pretty good keyboard player to do it, and you've also got to have a full-range controller. And since neither of those apply at the moment, I'm going to leave it in sustain mode, play in my part, and then enter my key switch notes later. So let me just hide this for a moment. I'm going to hit record and play something in. All right, and if we look in the score, we'll see the notes. And I'm going to put in a key signature, and I'm going to sort of go over some DAW functions now that are necessary when you're working with these types of key switch instruments in Philharmonic. So let me just start by putting in the notation set up with the right key. I'm going to drag that into A major, and there we go. And I'm going to switch to a graphic view over here, and let's put in our key switch notes. Now, before we do that, I'm just going to hide the inspector on the left. And you'll see that I've played this in pretty roughly. I'm not going to quantize the parts. I like keeping the loose timing. Some notes happen slightly ahead or slightly before the beat, like over here. But I want to remove these overlaps where some notes overlap into the start of the next note. So what I'm going to do is just zoom a little bit, and I'm going to go Command A to select all, and I'm going to go under Edit, Trim, and all DAWs have this type of function to remove overlaps. And it's just trimmed everything. I'll zoom back out, and you can see now that none of the notes overlap with the notes that come after it, but the start time position of all the note-ons has been preserved. So with that done, let's enter our key switch notes. I'm going to bring Miroslav Philharmonic 2 back up, and what I want to do is I want to use A0 for détaché for these first few notes, and that should sound pretty nice. Let's just cycle some of this and listen. All right, for that last long note, though, I want to switch articulations. So let's start by putting in our A0. I'm going to switch to a pencil tool to draw a note in, and I'm going to do it at the beginning of the bar. And let's just resize it. And what pitch I have there, I have F0. Let me just drag it up. It's hard to see the exact notes at the resolution when you're zoomed in like this. But it's important to have the key switch notes slightly before the note on event. So with that done, let me just hide Philharmonic again. I'm going to extend the length of this, and I'll explain why in a moment. So there's my melody part, and I'm extending the length, and I want my next key switch note to come in for this long note. And if I bring Philharmonic up, we'll see that I want to use Espressivo, which is B0. So let me copy this over, and I'll just transpose it up a tone. So there's my next key switch note, and you'll see that I have it coming a bit before the note on here. Let me just shorten it. Now, the reason that we want these notes lengthened, these key switch notes, is so that if we're starting playback in the middle, it'll always trigger the right articulation. For example, let's say I stop playback here and it's playing the Espressivo articulation, and then I decide I want to listen from the beginning, well, or listen from over here, let's say. I want it to not play it with the Espressivo articulation, but to chase this note event and play it with this articulation. So that's why we extend them. And then also in the settings, and again, all DAWs have this type of functionality. There's a note chase function, and I want to make sure that it's chasing sustained notes. So with that done, we can play back our little arrangement now, and we should be able to see and hear the articulations switching. So let's bring back Philharmonic and listen. And when we're working with key switching, another consideration is the score view. When we look at the score now, we're going to see these key switch notes, which we obviously don't want in the score. So again, most notation programs have this type of function. I'm going to create a staff style that filters out that range. So right now it's using treble clef, and I'm going to duplicate this style. And again, this is specific to Logic Pro X, but not uncommon. I'm going to double click that and rename it. I'm going to call it MP for Miroslav Philharmonic Violins. And I'm just going to limit the range here. We don't need the lower end of the range because violins don't play that low. And it just jumped down here alphabetically. So let's switch this score style to the new one, which is MP violins. And again, just raise up this bottom end. We don't need the low range. And you'll see there the notes have disappeared. So we'll still hear the results of them, but we won't see them in the score. Now let's create another part because not all key switches work in the same range. I'm going to duplicate this instrument. Let me name this one violins. And I'm going to name this one bassoons. So let me bring this up now. That's our original one. And on this one, I'm going to get rid of this violin. I'm just going to double click in and reload another instrument there. So I'm going to go into woodwinds. And again, we have solo and ensemble. I'm going to stick with ensemble for now. And I'm going to go to bassoons, and I'm going to put another key switch part in, double click, and it's loading it in, and it's replacing that part. And I can set volume and pan offsets there in MIDI channel, solo mute, etc. But for now, I'm leaving it with that. And this plays in the lower range. So the key switches are up high. And again, we click here and see the palette. And what I want to do now is record in a part, and I'm going to use some different articulations here. I'm going to use this one, and then maybe switch to a portato, which is a bit of a longer tone than staccato. But let me start by just recording it in with this. So I'm going to hide this and just play in my part for now. So there's my part, and there it is in the graphic display. And I'm not worried about note overlaps. And the key switch notes are now in the upper range. So I want to start by putting in an E5. There we go. And let me just click there and make sure I have the right pitch. It's F5. Go down a tone. And I'm going to have it start right at the very beginning, like that. And I want to extend it, and I want to have it change to another articulation when it does this run up over here. Even though they're slightly longer notes, they're still staccato sounding, but I want a different type of articulation. I'm going to use F#5, which is the portato type of articulation, but a short version. The 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 indicates the different lengths that the note is held for. So around here, let's put another note articulation in, and just going to copy that over, and I'll shift it up a tone, and we should be fine there. So if we listen, we'll hear and see the articulations changing. So that's nice. Now let's hide that and look in the score. And we're going to have to do the same thing because we have these key switch notes way up high. So let's go to the staff style, and I'm going to quickly duplicate this, and I'll call it MP bassoons. And here we'll have to limit the range at the top. And it's just jumped down there. So let's switch this here to MP bassoons, and we'll see that the key switch notes are gone. So that's a little idea of how to use the key switch instruments and integrate them with your DAW. And we could have used this all within one multi. I could have set the violins on one and the bassoons on another channel and used another channel all pointing to the same multi here. I chose not to do it. There are different strategies. You'll see in the next video why I've chosen this way.